Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Growing Resilient, Prosperous Local Economies. I'm Brett Schwartz, Associate Director at the NATO Research Foundation and head of our Stronger SEDS, Stronger Regions program funded by the U.S. Economic Development Administration, EDA. Thanks so much for joining us for this session. You know, taking a walk through any town in America today reveals the impact the pandemic has had on our economy. You'll no doubt see boarded up storefronts and closed businesses, many of which were flourishing a little over a year ago. And as you know, Main Street businesses were hit particularly hard and many have been slow to get back up and operating. Therefore, key strategies and policies to support long-term economic recovery should include promoting, coaching, and lifting up the local and small businesses that are at the heart of our local, regional, and national economies. Additionally, growing and nurturing entrepreneurial ecosystems should continue to be a top priority for communities and regions big and small across the country. And that's why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation today with Kimber, Lanning, and Liza Noland of Local First Arizona, who will share more about their work in communities and what strategies and approaches you can pursue to support businesses in your own regions. Now, I'm really excited to have Kimber and Liza join us in just a moment, but before that, I want to share a few quick remarks with all of you. So today's webinar is the third in a springtime webinar series the NATO Research Foundation is hosting on SEDS, recovery, and resilience. Now, the NATO Research Foundation is the nonprofit research and training affiliate of NATO, the National Association of Development Organizations. Now, NATO is a membership association of regional development and economic development districts all across the country, but primarily those that serve small metros and rural regions. We also have additional associate members that aren't regional economic organizations, but are also working hard to promote economic and community development. So we're so glad that Local First Local First Arizona, has become one of NATO's most recent members, and we're happy to have them as part of the family. We're now in the 5th year of our Stronger SEDS, Stronger Regions program, generously funded by EDA. And through this program, we've organized trainings and conferences, led webinars, created case studies and videos, and developed lots of other resources to train regional staff on all things related to the comprehensive economic development strategy, the process, and the document. So all those materials that we've developed through this training program are available online and for free at our companion website, sedcentral.com. So there you'll find links to webinar recordings like this one, presentation slides, case studies, and videos on all things SEDS, including a SEDS 101 section for those of you who are new to the SEDS process. So this website is updated regularly every month, so please check in as new information and resources are added. So I just want to talk a little bit about logistics. Thanks again so much for joining us today. We do hope this can be a conversation with all of you that have attended. So if you do have a question or comment for our speakers, please use the questions box in the drop-down menu on the right side of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many of those at the end. We are recording today's webinar, and it should be made available by tomorrow at nato.org as well as sedcentral.com, and you should also be receiving an email as well with the link. So hope you can take a look again or share it with your colleagues afterwards. I also want to let you know we have one more webinar coming up in this springtime webinar series on May 26th. We have economic development districts leading the way on pandemic economic recovery. That will be a roundtable discussion with staff at economic development districts and at EDA regional office around the country to really talk about ways that districts have been utilizing their funding and resources to support the communities in a variety of ways to support with pandemic recovery. So I hope you can join us for that on May 26th. You can register online at nato.org for that. And finally, of course, please be in touch with me if you have any questions about this webinar series, about our work with Stronger SEDS, Stronger Regions, or anything related to NATO and the NATO Research Foundation. Love to hear from you and see how you're doing. So now it's my pleasure to welcome Kimber Lanning and Liza Noland to our webinar today. Kimber is the CEO and Liza is the Director of Programs at Local First Arizona. You'll hear much more about the organization from Kimber and Liza, so I'll keep this part short, but briefly, Local First Arizona was founded in 2009 and is a nonprofit organization committed to community and economic development throughout Arizona. Its work across multiple programs and projects connects people, locally owned businesses, and communities for meaningful actions that build a diverse, inclusive, and prosperous Arizona. So Liza and Kimber, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Great. Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, great. So I just want to give a background for everyone on the call today. The format for this webinar is meant to be conversational. I have a handful of questions for Kimber and Liza that I've prepared in advance that hopefully will really help highlight some of the key points of their work and approach. So we'll be in dialogue for a bit, and then following the prepared questions, we'll turn to the questions and comments from our audience. So again, please type those in as they come to you throughout the presentation. So without further ado, let's get started. And it's probably the best place to start is at the top here. And would love for both of you to talk briefly about the mission of Local First Arizona and some of these key projects and initiatives that you're working on to help kind of place our conversation in context.
Fantastic. So I'll jump in on that one, Brett. So the mission of Local First Arizona is really operating statewide to build a more diverse and inclusive Arizona economy. And we do this through distinct programmatic areas. So the first one being investing in entrepreneurship. We really believe that entrepreneurship is the goal of, or is at the core of building an inclusive economy. And so we invest in entrepreneurs of color, we invest in rural entrepreneurs, anyone that wants to start a small business in our site, in our view, is really an opportunity to grow that local economy, and we believe it's worthy of intentional investment. And then we also do a lot of work around increasing food access and investing in food systems work that helps all sorts of small businesses get their start while at the same time improving access to healthy food in the areas that oftentimes need it the most. And then we do a lot of work around the climate crisis and building self-reliance and resiliency in our communities with an eye toward preparing for the changes that are coming our way in the environment. And then finally is the area of Liza's expertise, which is rural community and economic development. And so that gives you just a little bit of a glimpse into the work that we do. And I'm going to let Liza talk a little bit more about the mission and goals of our rural programs.
Sure. And it's really the same, right? Except with that rural twist. So when you look at our approach statewide, and then you add some of the rural characters and flavor into the work, it just becomes a little bit more on the ground. So the rural team focuses really strongly on all of the same programmatic areas, looking at inclusive economies, looking at climate and conservation coalitions, focusing on the strength of our entrepreneurs and building one job at a time. And we do that with a very agile approach, very customized, very personal, and we're definitely the organization that knows these communities from front to back, the politics, the personalities, the relationships that exist. And our focus there is to build bridges with unlikely partners to accomplish economic stability and strength.
Great, thanks so much. And yeah, looking forward to be able to kind of take a deeper dive into some of those lessons learned and themes through this program. But just briefly, Kimber, could you talk a little bit about the kind of origins of Local First Arizona, why you saw there was a need for this type of organization in your state, and kind of what the kind of roots of that story are?
Absolutely. So my background is as a small business owner myself. I have a record store that I've had for 34 years. And so I got a firsthand experience in battling big corporations to have a seat at the table. And Arizona is the youngest of all the continental states. And we really started to mature as a state right when chain stores became a model, right? It became a thing and became flooding across in rapid fire pace. So in our community here in Arizona, 2/3 of the people who live here came from somewhere else. And so that means we have to work a little bit harder to introduce people to this place. And so when we started, there were 2 chain restaurants for every 1 local restaurant here in Arizona. And today that number is reversed. There are 2 local independent restaurants for every 1 chain restaurant. And that really signifies 2 things. First, that we're building a stronger, more resilient economy, because the local restaurateur is going to hire local graphic designers, website developers, bookkeepers, and others. And that silently keeps dollars moving through our economy. But secondarily, those local businesses are creating the kind of character and sense of place that further connects people to Arizona. And like I said, when people are moving here at such a rapid pace, we need to connect them. And those local businesses, it turns out, really connect people to their place. And many studies have been done that show that when people are more connected to their place, they're more likely to vote, to volunteer, even to give charitably. So it's important to connect people to their place. And so that's really the origins of the organization, is looking at entrepreneurship and then growing it out from there.
Great. Perfect. Yeah, we'll get to talk about some of these topics that you just brought up, Kimber and Liza, throughout our conversations today. So thanks so much for giving us that foundation. And just want to jump to our next question here. You know, this past year has been unprecedented. It's probably the understatement of the day here. But it's been also a chance for us to kind of learn and reassess and really kind of think about the work we do and how we serve communities here. So we'd just love to hear both of yours kind of reflections on maybe the biggest lesson that you learned over the past year in doing this work, maybe how you had to pivot or think a little bit differently, but really what's kind of your big takeaway from this past year?
Well, there's a couple of ways that we could answer that question. And so one of them, when you think about us as an organization, you mentioned pivoting, and we ran early and we ran fast to try to help as many businesses as we could. And so we started a small business relief fund that would provide immediate small grants to businesses with fewer than 5 employees, in many cases fewer than 3 employees, to provide them necessary resources to pay their bills and try to stay afloat. We ended up raising nearly $12 million and distributing that across the state. I mean, our initial vision was, let's raise $500,000, and we ended up raising and distributing $12 million. And we did that through direct outreach into every county across the state of Arizona. So we were able to think very entrepreneurially ourselves as an organization and really move into the spaces where we were needed the most. And I really credit our team for being willing to, drop something that wasn't necessarily doable anymore and move really quickly into what was needed and being responsive to the communities that we serve. But the other way I want to answer that, in terms of biggest lessons learned, I think there's a tendency by the mainstream media and just people generally in conversations talk about small businesses in the abstract. And I think my biggest lesson is that people need to be reminded on a daily basis that small businesses are families, they're your neighbors, they're your cousins, they're actually people. And we can't just put them into a chart and count them up and as if they're a thing, and they're actually people. So we were able to call these individuals and listen firsthand to the challenges that they face. We were on the phone with small business owners that were being evicted, while the police were arriving and ushering them out of there. We were on the phone while people were trying to decide, do I keep my apartment or do I keep my salon? Because if I don't keep my salon, I have nothing to go back to, and I only know how to cut hair, and that's what I've done for 40 years. And it becomes very real and very human. And I think my biggest takeaway is that we can never just think of small business as this abstract thing ever again.
Liza, any thoughts as well about kind of your lesson? Kimber, thank you so much for that perspective. I mean, I think it's so critical in any aspect of planning or economic development, as you mentioned, to know their faces, and I think, and families and stories behind these. And I think, this year certainly drove that home. And the irony is we were socially distancing ourselves, right? We were kind of interacting in this way, but that importance of that kind of that closeness, but was really came through. So thanks for sharing that. Sorry, Liza, I cut you off.
No, not at all. I think obviously Local First Arizona has stood on the platform of buy local and the economic power of that for over 15 years. But COVID really brought that right to the forefront, and the power of purchasing locally. So we had a couple of our rural communities. We were just on a call the other day talking about how they'd actually had the strongest sales tax year that they'd ever seen, because people were forced to purchase locally within the community because they couldn't travel and, you know, go to the next closest big metro area, and ended up supporting their local businesses. And it's this aha moment of local business as an economic driver, that there is power in small business, and that by supporting it, those dollars circulate locally and keep people in jobs and keep, you know, the economy flowing. So I really think the appreciation for small business has been very enlightening for some of our economic development professionals, some of our community, you know, leadership, and looking at that as how can we better enhance what we saw as so powerful through all of this to keep us going and keep our economy thriving.
Great. Yeah, and, you know, and on a similar note, I think it's a good kind of segue to the next question here about kind of looking at things differently, thinking creatively, as we were required to over the past year. But really wanted to kind of pick both of your brains here about, you know, kind of new creative approaches to rural economic development that have really kind of gained traction in your communities, either over this past year or kind of trends that you've been seeing. Just how are you talking about and doing, you know, kind of economic development in ways that really kind of smash the status quo and really look at the possibilities out there instead of we've always done it this way, let's keep doing it. So I'd love to hear about kind of how you're kind of mixing things up a bit.
So how much time do we get for this question? This is like everything that we're about. But we've always looked at the magical economic development definition, right? And that there's the traditional look of economic development, which is bring in the large employer, the big whale, and hundreds of jobs at a time, and strengthen the economy through that, you know, that one big shot. And on our end, it's always been one job at a time. How do we just build up these communities, sometimes of 1,500 people to 11,000 people, one important job at a time, one retained youth or young talent, you know, at a time. And so again, always strengthening the philosophy of entrepreneurship, the strength of entrepreneurs. That may not at this point be, you know, trend setting, but it certainly is part of where we're going and where we've always been. One of the unique things that we started to see, and I don't know if it was COVID, you know, initiated, but food access became a real problem in some of our rural communities. And what was discovered was, how strong is our local market? Do we have an independent grocer? How strong are they? What does their distribution network look like? And what are some of the challenges there? And in that, discovering that some of our communities are really strong in local food producers, growers, and agriculture. And so we started to really see an opportunity to look at food as an economic driver, and to look at some of just the stats that are out there. I mean, if you look at just connection to place, just keeping people connected to each other in a rural community, a farmer's market has 6 times the social interaction that you'd get at a grocery store. So if you're looking for people to sort of connect to their local growers, producers, but also to each other, farmers markets are a great place to do that. If you look at jobs in agriculture, a local grower or producer that sells to their local market will create 13 jobs for every $1 million in revenue, versus a grower that just outsources those products that creates 3 for every $1 million. So when you better connect your food entrepreneurs to their local marketplace, you've got an economic driver that most people haven't seen, cultivated, or really used before. And so we've really started to hone in on the strength of agriculture in our rural communities, the strength of food access in the food system. How well connected are those local producers to the marketplace themselves? And can we create farmers markets, CSAs, or co-ops that help to kind of build in that economic driver within a community? So I think really looking at food is a fun and interesting place to look. The other one I would throw out there that we're seeing that we think is really neat is an awareness for inclusivity. So we all know the same 10 people at every table and every meeting and every planning session, and we've seen each other and had coffee like for years, right? But we're starting to see some strategies that pull in maybe the perspectives of youth, that pull in the perspectives of more representative cultures for the community. If you've got 40% of your community that is Hispanic and you don't have a Hispanic at the table, we've got a problem, right? We are not representing this community in our strategic plans and our visions. And we're seeing a shift in that. And how do we better reach and meet them where they are so that we're getting a more robust input on some of our strategies going forward?
I know, Liza, we're going to be talking more about kind of equity and inclusivity in a few minutes here too, but particularly as you bring up food, could you share a little bit about how those kind of themes are really intertwined and what you've seen, with food systems and access related to kind of equity issues?
For sure, in so many ways, in ways I wouldn't have even known really going into it, right? So I think we're always learning as we go into these new strategies, but we've always been challenged in Arizona to really connect with our tribal communities and to connect our rural communities to their nearby tribal communities. And we found that food happens to be a universal connector. And so we're really kind of looking at how we can strengthen. We've got an amazing set of growers and producers in our tribal communities as well as in our rural communities. And how do we strengthen those and also then start to build those trusting relationships to provide food to those communities and those that are in need. So that's been, food has been a great connector for us in some of those areas. And it's the same even in kind of different cultural places, being able to provide youth markets or Hispanic markets or kind of our world bazaar that we even do in Metro Phoenix. It just highlights sort of, and it gives people a voice and an outlet to share their cultures, their food with their community as a whole.
Great, thanks for that. So I want to jump over kind of building off these themes here. I know kind of coaching and working closely with local businesses is such a core part of the work that you do. So I'd love to kind of hear some of these kind of strategies and approaches that you found have been really useful for engaging with businesses who we know, business owners work on different schedules than some of us might have in kind of traditional office jobs. So how best to kind of, do outreach and engage and really, again, kind of hear their stories and voices and their needs. So love to kind of hear how you've made it work, especially during this time.
Sure. I'll probably defer to Kimber too at the end of this because she is an outside the box thinker, and as a small business owner, I think super strong in the realm of thinking differently. But if I had one thing I'd say, it is make it personal. We have got to meet our small businesses, our rural businesses where they're at, and the webinar and e-blast world is just probably not really working at this point. So we're really taking this look at how can we understand that rural business owners are working in their business, have very little time to work on their business, are working on building back their business right now, and we're kind of trying to support that. What is the best way and place to be in that space so that you're truly helpful? And we've found a lot of success with true one-on-one consulting. So we've got a great team, whether they be internal, we've got a great internal team that does this. And then we also created kind of a toolkit of mentors, subject matter experts in accounting, in HR, in marketing. And we have in-kind sponsorships and partnerships to be able to provide one-on-one specific, hours of consultation to small businesses based on their identified needs and really solve problems. Like, let's not just talk really high level, let's get in there, help them solve the problem and get them back into working in their business because that's really what they need. So I think it's all about being personally available, having the resources there to truly solve problems and then get them back to work.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think this is one thing that you and your team are very good at, Liza, is including the small businesses in the visions and strategies for the entire community. I'm always shocked at, a small town maybe that wins a grant to put together a tourism strategy, but fails to really engage the small businesses. And the small businesses, particularly restaurant and retail, that's your community space. And so it really is crucially important to engage those small businesses in the bigger strategies, whether it be an economic development plan or a tourism plan or any other sort of vision. The business owners need to have a seat at the table at every turn And then when you have them engaged and bought into that vision, they're much more likely to be participatory, to go home and do their homework, to use the right hashtag or whatever it is that you want them to do, because they feel like they're part of a bigger conversation. And it's really easy to look past that and think they all know what's going on, but it's really important to include them in those conversations as well.
Great, and thanks, Kimber. I'm glad you just brought up tourism. I think this is something that all of us are interested in, and it's a huge part of the economy in Arizona and for many of the folks on the call today. But we'd really love to hear about your work, with smaller places around tourism, and particularly just kind of branding communities and regions, and really kind of leveraging local assets as part of a kind of larger tourism strategy. So I'd love to hear kind of how that's working, and kind of maybe where you see the future of kind of tourism in this kind of economic landscape.
Sure, I'll jump in on that one too. So first and foremost, we've got an amazing program with the Arizona Office of Tourism, and I don't know if this is nationwide, but it is truly a best practice. So every year they commit a portion of their budget, I believe it's $1 million, to the rural co-op. And the rural co-op program basically allows for small communities and DMOs to opt in, and the Office of Tourism will match their dollars spent on a specific advertising package. So basically these small communities with no budgets are able to get double the impact with their precious advertising dollars. Through that program, we identified an issue where people and communities wanted to opt in, they want to advertise, but the minute that they did, they had no idea what to share. They were like, okay, send us your ads, send us your logo, send us your taglines. And they were like, ooh, I don't know. So our branding services come in, and we fundamentally believe that if you're going to develop a community brand, you have got to have the community's input. And where that diverts from like bringing on a community engagement organization for branding versus bringing on an advertising agency is that an ad agency likes to see a steering committee of about 3 people. And in a rural community, you've got a steering committee of about 3,000 people, because there's social media and there's opinions. And if people didn't have a say or feel like they were represented, they're going to rip it apart and create their own. So our community engagement process, we bring about 20 to 25 people in as a steering committee, and we ensure that everybody's represented. Again, it comes back to youth input, business input, community leadership, nonprofits, different cultures, different perspectives, new residents, old residents. Bring the naysayers, bring the positive ones. We need everybody in the room, because only when we find an identity that they all can concede is representative will it get used. An example too is making it flexible for them to be able to use. So there's a community, one of our favorites, Superior in Arizona, and we worked on a branding initiative with them, and we created this tagline that said "Adventure Elevated," and it was so cool, right? Because it shows sophistication, but also the rock climbing and the adventure and all of that. And we got one guy who at the very end said, he was there to represent the community, just a community member. And he said, love that, but that's not why I live here, right? And so he just asked us to tweak it a little bit and said, could we have adjustable taglines so that we could say adventure elevated, but also community elevated, and maybe other things that based on the theme. Yeah. And so Superior was able to really flex it in their community branding. They use that community elevated for their parks, and experiences and their community experiences. COVID, they used safety elevated and really kind of promoted, that through that. So once you've got everybody's input, you're just more stronger coming out of sort of people being able to use it, people buying into it, and it really being impactful. So.
And I would just like to add, just as a reminder, you can have, some communities invest heavily in advertising. You really can have the best advertising campaign known to mankind. And if your frontline businesses don't have exceptional customer service, and if your frontline businesses aren't offering an exceptional experience, it's not going to work. So really engaging those small businesses, as Liza mentioned, is a key piece to building an overall successful tourism strategy.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me, I had a colleague who visited a small community a couple years ago, and I think was taking a taxi in from the airport, and was just, just saying, hey, what's there to do, in town? I'm excited to be here and visit. And the driver was just like, this place, there's nothing to do here. It's, and so thinking of who are your kind of, ambassadors, of the community. Those are the folks you want to engage with, because they're the first people that you meet. If your driver from the airport kind of has a kind of negative attitude or doesn't really see the potential or have been part of those conversations, as you're mentioning, that's kind of a strike against right off the bat there. So
to add to that, Brett, we have a small town that people drive by, like a lot of small towns, with a highway going past, and if you really want to get people off the main drag, you've got to think strategically. And while this community recognized that everybody was stopping, it was actually in southern Arizona on the way to Mexico. Before going to the beach in Mexico, they would all hit this one grocery store to stock up on groceries and ice and everything they were going to need for the beach once they get south of the border. And this grocery store owner had a habit of hiring 17, 18, 19-year-olds. So you'd be in a great mood and you'd say, I've never been to this town before. What is there to do? And you can imagine how many different ways an 18-year-old can say nothing, And so we really had to work with them to get them to understand, as the youth who were the cashiers at this one stop that everybody made, this town's future depends on you. And we worked with them to get excited about telling people about the town square. They never knew about the $8 million renovation of the town square or the different events or things. I mean, they grew their hometown pride in the process of listening to us talk about their own hometown. So
yeah, seeing everyone as an ambassador, absolutely.
Yeah, Liza. I think, and Kimber's downplaying it a little bit, but it was brilliant. And I would suggest this for anybody. They did, you do fam tours with like tourism companies that come and or tour buses that come. They did a local fam tour. They got all of those frontline employees and those people that were in positions to be ambassadors onto a bus, and in a town not that large, just blew their minds with some of the things and the history and the reasons behind some of the rec hall and the curly school, artisan lofts and the plaza. And these were things they didn't know. You assume your locals know. Don't do that. They might not know. And so the fam tour was brilliant because they got to see it through the eyes of a tourist and really got to hear why these places were so special and what people might want to hear about them. And it just changed really the trajectory for that initiative.
Absolutely. So yeah, I want to go a little off script here and keep talking about these issues in tourism, because I think it's really fascinating and such a key part of what you do. But I'd love to hear your response to kind of either not necessarily the critique, but the challenges often brought on by a tourism strategy as a form of economic diversification. The concern being that it could be seasonal jobs, it could be low-paying jobs. How do you build out a tourism strategy that can really, that's good quality, family sustaining jobs that can enhance quality of life and really be a driver and really help the locals and the community, and not just with an eye to visitors? How tourism can strategy, like you mentioned, can also lift up locals. So any thoughts on that? Is tourism thinking about it differently beyond, like you said, seasonal or retail jobs?
I'll start, Liza, if you're okay with that. So I think that there's a critical piece of how the economy works that gets overlooked when we dismiss tourism as seasonal or low-wage jobs. The businesses that support tourism, whether it's restaurant, retail, hospitality, when you have local ownership, you can't just simply measure the job of the person in the business, the frontline worker. You have to also measure, that might be a primary job, but you have to measure the secondary and tertiary impacts as well. And every one of those local businesses is going to hire a local graphic designer or website developer or payroll service provider, a lawyer. And those are the jobs that are also, so if you lose those frontline businesses, you're not just going to lose the barista, you're also going to lose all of those business professionals that are behind the scenes that we don't tend to count. And so when when you add up the jobs that are impacted by new dollars coming in through tourism, it's substantial, and it only amplifies through, through the multiplier effect. And so I would just encourage, especially small communities, if you don't have the small business sector, how are you going to live in rural America as an accountant if there's no small local businesses there to hire you, right? So these are the kinds of things that we're constantly thinking of, the bigger, more systemic economy that's impacted by tourism.
Yeah, and I would add, in the workforce work that we're doing right now, I think what we're seeing is that these retail, hospitality, and restaurant positions aren't seen as a career pathway, that there's so little pride being built in those entry-level roles because of some of the narrative that you're talking about, that it causes a disconnect in what truly could be a position of pride. I mean, these are people in a position to truly change the economy of their community. And I think the community itself needs to support that, but also the employers need to really look at how to cultivate those employees upwards. How do we make these into careers? How do we bring along the front desk attendant at our local hotel and pull them into higher paying jobs and roles, and see it more as a career path and not so much just a, stopgap. So I think cultivating some pride, building out career awareness and exploration, and truly understanding the economic impact of those roles would.
Great. Perfect. Thank you so much. Oh, okay, Liza, just cut off for a second. Just want to make sure I still had you. Great. So yeah, we've got a handful of questions left here. I want to encourage folks that are listening in to also type in their questions, as we'll have some Q&A with the audience at the end. But want to shift over to our next question here, which is, kind of a theme that's been kind of woven into our discussion today, and that's really about, what approaches can be taken to make sure that recovery from the pandemic is equitable and inclusive. We know, recovery from the recession was uneven across the country, across communities. But what Kimber and Liza, in your work, do you see are really kind of key strategies to make sure that this time around and this time we can really make sure that this is a more equitable and inclusive recovery?
So I think it's important to start by saying, if we're not very intentional about this work, it just simply isn't going to happen. So what we're doing, and what I would encourage others to consider, Liza and I have been working very heavily on this issue. And we launched the Arizona Economic Recovery Center just 2 weeks ago. And the idea behind the Recovery Center is really to tee up Arizona to respond to what is going to be the largest stimulus we'll ever see in our lifetimes, followed by a wave of philanthropic dollars, because a lot of the foundations with endowments have performed incredibly well during 2020, during COVID. So how do we get ready for them as well and ensure that those dollars get into the communities that need it the most? So the Economic Recovery Center really is two things. One is we're taking as many grants as we can possibly find, federal, state, local, foundation, and we're taking those grants and distilling them into one-page templates that are really quick and dirty: who, what, why, when, where. Anybody can pick them up, understand who they're targeting, who qualifies. And then what we're doing is we're deploying additional capacity for the small town municipalities or nonprofits that need additional help around grant writing, around facilitation, around project management or bookkeeping, to ensure that they have an opportunity to successfully compete for those dollars. It really is a capacity issue. We can't simply just say we want to make sure that these communities win more. We can't just simply continue to throw more opportunities their way. We need to roll up our sleeves and go in and help them compete for these dollars. We're also seeing trends around requirements for collaborative efforts, which is why we're offering facilitation, multilingual, multicultural facilitation, to ensure that, let's just say you have a parks department that wants to partner with an arts and culture organization and they've never worked together before. We might be able to deploy a facilitator that can ensure that the arts and culture entity has a seat at the table, and that the work and the funds are distributed equitably to make sure that everybody really has an opportunity to thrive in that scenario. So the Arizona Economic Recovery Center really is very intentionally trying to drive dollars into the communities that need it the most.
Yeah, I was able to review on the website, you know, you posted the goals and mission, and it's really phenomenal. And I think what you mentioned too about able to translate what we're expecting into plain language, into language that local communities can understand and use and know how to access. I think for all of us on the call, that's a really critical element at this time, because it's complicated. Things are moving quickly. I mean, I know we're getting tons of questions every day. And so that kind of education element and really that hand-holding, and not in a negative way. I think that's really important part of what we all do to make sure that folks know what is available, you know, to their communities.
And I think that, Liza, if you wouldn't mind, talk about the path for the town of San Manuel to even get ready. I mean, it's been a 1.5-year journey to get them ready to potentially compete for some of these dollars.
Yeah, you know, I think absolutely. So San Manuel, it started out as a phone call where it was 3 women called the Cat Ladies Community Action Team. And they had no solution for their community. It's an ex-mining town, 3,000 people that live there, really no economic drivers whatsoever. They're in a cul-de-sac, so it's not like you pass through it. You have to go there purposefully. And they said, our town is dying and we do not know what to do. After a couple of visits and some conversations, it's an unincorporated community, so we decided to help them develop a community development corporation, a nonprofit that would be established to really help them, one, have a unified voice to the county so that there was a trusted entity in that community where the county could, you know, better communicate and flow some resources through. 2, to be able to access grants for the community, and 3, to sort of have a community organizer, somebody who could help better connect the people to each other. And man, was it a journey. There was fights and cynicism and social media, and they were going to picket, and you know, they were coming after us for trying to incorporate the community, trying to start an HOA. You know, no amount of good intention can overcome, you know, fear. And so it took us about 1 year to get them on board for what the organization even would be. What even are we talking about here? And then to get board members to step up, to get volunteers to show up, to get the community out to vote, to get them established as a nonprofit, and just now, you know, sort of moving them into progress where they're positioned finally, almost 2 years later, to get their first grant. So there's a lot, you know, to assume that the money's there so everybody's ready to get it is just false. I've worked for Local First now for about 3 years. Prior to that, I would not have known what a grant was. I was a business owner. I was a for-profit thinker. Grants are not natural to very many people. So, you know, there's got to be a very strong support system, again, to meet them where they are and get them ready to utilize that money.
Great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that story. And, you know, just excited to see, you know, best of luck with the recovery team here, and the timing is right and the need is large. So excited to see where that goes. Just got a handful of questions here too, or 2 more left. And this one, you know, the vast majority of our audience today are folks from councils of government, from the Economic Development District. These are folks that work regionally on these issues, of course, serving small and local communities in the process. But any advice that you have maybe for where you've seen some of your approaches and strategies really work regionally, able to take them to scale. Just any advice that you might have for our folks on the call from COGS and EDDs.
Well, we've got great relationships out here in Arizona, and really believe in the work that is happening. So from my perspective, when it relates to supporting small local businesses, I would just reiterate how important it is to include small businesses in the planning phase and the community discussions. And then, as Liza just mentioned, sometimes in a region that a COG might cover, there might be small towns that don't really have an equitable voice. really going above and beyond to meet the people in those communities and elevate their needs and their voices, and encouraging them around the table. And then also focusing on ethnic diversity. I think too often we have community meetings and we just shrug and we say, well, they were invited and they didn't come. If they're not coming, then they don't feel welcome, or they don't understand how it relates to them. And I would encourage you to try again and try differently, to make sure that you've got diverse voices around the table. I think that's going to be essential to building true resiliency in the communities where you're serving. Liza, anything you'd like to add on top of that?
No, I just know it's really easy to kind of get wrapped up in kind of the lingo of government work, right? And I think marketing is always a deficiency for some of us that are doing really great work. And I think the EDDs and the COGs have so many amazing programs. And I think sometimes it's a matter of letting people know what those programs are and connecting those communities to that help. So partnering with other organizations and making sure that your programs are understood and being communicated out there, I think is critical as well. I know that's a challenge, but I think there's a lot of work that could be done and a lot of people that just don't know.
Right. That's a great point, Liza. I mean, so many of the districts and COGs are just doing good work day in, day out. It's very much behind the scenes, kind of under the radar, that leads to these big successes and front page stories, but oftentimes the community or the region at large may not know. So for those of you on the call from districts and COGs, be sure to kind of celebrate your wins and get the word out. And as Kimber and Liza mentioned, use language and talk about these things in very kind of human, social kind of storytelling. I think is so critical. So it's my PSA right there. But let's wrap up my kind of prepared questions here on kind of an inspirational note. This is hard work. This is draining work, but it's also really important and critical and exciting work. So just want to ask the two of you, just right now, as you're, where you're sitting, what is really motivating you or giving you inspiration, for this work to get out of bed in the morning and turn on Zoom and continue this, even though it's been a challenge this year. Where are you kind of drawing that inspiration from, and what's pushing you forward?
I'll jump in. Kimber, you teed me up with San Manuel, but for me, it's progress. It's that we're seeing kind of the fruits of the labor, that we're seeing when we're working hand in hand with the communities, when we're action focused, goal based, and truly sort of trying to move the needle. When you see that happening, then that can be extremely motivational. So to see a community like San Manuel from where it started to 2 years later, had I known it was 2 years then, would I have been as motivated as I was then? I don't know, but it's a longer term process than you think. But if you stick it out, stay, focused on the action, stay agile, move with where the need is, where the energy is, and then you start to see, the ribbon cutting at the local community center, people really starting to come out for the meetings, more people applying for the board roles. It's little wins. You have to celebrate them. For me, I went to the ribbon cutting on Saturday for the new community center in San Manuel. Sunday afternoon, I got an email from Aguila, Arizona, an unincorporated community, not familiar with where it is. And he said something to the effect of, my community is dying and I need your help. And to me, here we go again, right? And now I know what it's going to take, at least, more or less. And to me, that's very motivational because I know we can get there.
It's beautiful. And it starts with a good acronym, right? At the beginning with the cat team, right?
the cat ladies. Always pay attention to the cat ladies.
Absolutely. Thanks, Liza. Congratulations to you on that work. It's great to hear.
Yeah. Well, I'm inspired by Liza and her work. In all honesty, this organization has come such a long way, and we have 32, 33 staff all doing tremendous work in their own right. And that's inspiring. But I would say broadly, what's inspiring to me is the number of people who are waking up to the importance of local economy work. And, they predicted that online shopping would replace local businesses. And they're still predicting that, right? And beating that drum. And yet, if you look closely at every study that's done, the end of the study will say that, hey, those local businesses are doing much better than we ever thought they would be. And that's because relationships matter most. And that's because it turns out people really like to know who they're doing business with. And so I get inspired every day by the number of successes that we're seeing, by everyday people who go above and beyond to support our local businesses, and by economic developers who are waking up to how important those small businesses really are. Not just that we can, do the soundbite that small business is the backbone of the economy, but rather to deeply understand that they're the ones that are hiring the business professionals. They're the ones driving the local conversations, and they're the ones that are the face that the visitor sees when they come into town. So all of those things are wins. When we started this work way back when, there weren't a lot of people talking about local economies. And I would say it's much different today. I'm also very excited about the food system work that Liza mentioned, that we're starting to look really at the health equity and the social determinants of health, and that's causing people to think about system change instead of being siloed in their approach to the work. It's how do our economic systems and financial systems interact with our food systems, and how is that playing out in our communities that have limited access to healthy food? The bigger picture questions, I think, are more commonplace now, and that I find particularly inspiring.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kimber. Well, we got to the end of our kind of prepared questions, so thanks so much for running through those with us. Great way to end on that high note. But now I want to take some questions from the audience, and we've had some folks that have been typing in throughout our conversation today. But if one comes to you now, feel free to type those in. But there was a question that did come in. It was a long one, but I'll try to hopefully capture the spirit of it here. But really about this idea of access to healthcare for employees and folks that might want to start a small business or kind of change jobs, particularly late in careers for a variety of reasons, and just that fear of healthcare and benefits and just what that landscape looks like. And Kimber and Liza, just curious if you have any thoughts about that or examples you've seen for small businesses that have been able to provide those, to employees or pooling resources or what that looks like. Because I think that's a fear for a lot of folks, what they might have to give up to maybe pursue a dream or a new approach to a job.
That's a very difficult question to answer because here in Arizona, we've had a few pooled examples, healthcare organizations that have stepped up to pool small business opportunities, and they were actually shut down. We don't quite have the setup here in Arizona to get those off the ground. But I will say for small businesses, there are plenty of companies that are specializing in small businesses that are more responsive to the needs of small businesses. And I do think it's really important for us to find ways to be competitive. That being said, it is amazing how many big chain retailers do not offer healthcare benefits, right? And so often we're looking at does small business compete on healthcare, but it's pretty easy to compete with most chain stores because so many of them don't offer healthcare benefits. Here in our state, at one point, they're no longer, but at one point Walmart was the largest employer and 83% of their employees had no healthcare benefits. So I do think it's important for small businesses to really up their game. I think this is another way that we could compete for the highest quality talent as well.
Thanks for that. We've had a few questions come in about, and we touched on this briefly, but engaging young people and youth in this. What's maybe some stories or best practices you've seen? And I think the example of, the young people working at the grocery store, getting them out in the community, kind of, but just love to hear any other examples of kind of youth engagement around this work for both maybe K through 12 now, but also for young people that want to return home possibly to small communities, to start businesses, to run for office, to, kind of live out their small town dream. So any great examples you might have?
I have two that come immediately to mind. The first actually was in branding. We were branding a community called Apache Junction. It was not the easiest community to brand if you ever look it up, but it is a beautiful community from the inside out. And so we got the same 10 people's input, and then we decided let's pull together some youth. And so we had ages, I want to say they were probably 8 to 18. And we did a workshop, super cool facilitation model, which was that they sort of had to create a newspaper headline and supporting, supporting headlines and some data and a picture of what the community newspaper would have to say in 10 years to get them to come back and raise their family in their town. And, at all ages, they were all, one of them was obviously a carnival, it opened, and, there was a few things, but there were some really interesting insights that came out of it, which was one, they talked about jobs. And they talked about jobs because of their perspective, which was, if we had more jobs in our community, my dad would be home for dinner at night. And that was like mind blowing to me, that he recognized this need for jobs because of how it impacts them at home. There was another group that highlighted, we wish the kids took over the turkey parade. And so they basically wanted to do the Thanksgiving parade with kids' input. And so now Apache Junction has a youth advisory committee for the town of Apache Junction. And it's just super cool to kind of have seen that came out of just what seemed like a fun, sort of event, some really interesting insights. The second was that we were doing some workforce work and identified that in manufacturing, there were 0 applicants to a lot of the jobs that were out there. And so we convened those that were already working in the manufacturing field in this community, and found that none of them were from the community. Many of them had come in from another community that had a manufacturing base, kind of that identity within their town or their state, and that they were feeling very disconnected to the community itself. So we launched a young professionals group. And so coalition building and creating a place where young professionals can come meet each other, find their ways that they want to influence and impact the community and have some sort of voice, truly influence, is one of the best things that you can do. They don't know how to get involved. They're not going to come to the chamber meeting. They don't know to attend a city council meeting. So create their space where they can carve out their own impact, and that might help with recruitment, retention, and all sorts of things.
Great. Thanks, Liza. There's someone just jumped in the chat and said they lived in Apache Junction and loved it. So there we go.
Right? It is. It's like all these little hidden gems.
Yeah.
I have a couple of other quick examples.
Sure.
We had a young indigenous partner from the Tohono O'odham Nation who came and spoke at our rural policy forum, and he talked about his family members getting sick with diabetes, and he said, I don't even want one more family member to get sick like this. And so he started community gardening, and he got his entire high school, they started to get growing club, and he got his whole high school engaged in growing healthy indigenous foods. And so that was an inspiring way for youth to get involved. And then finally, one thing that we did, teaching youth about customer service, if you just take a dry approach, you're not going to win. So we hired a local theater troupe to come in and act out bad customer service until everybody was laughing. And then we had broken them down enough to be able to listen to our feedback about their negativity. So it worked out well.
Wow. I would have loved to have seen that. And I just think it's a great example of all these different areas that can kind of come together to support this kind of broad approach. And I love that. So we're pushing up on the end of the hour here. I want to respect everybody's time, but Kimber and Liza, I just want to give you a chance in the last few seconds here to kind of share any final thoughts. Really, really appreciate your time with us today. This was a lot of fun. I know no Anderson Cooper, but it was great to be able to interview you and hear what you're working on. So any kind of final thoughts here as we start wrapping up?
Liza?
I would just say approach this work with curiosity, right? There's always something new that comes out of every project. There's always a new way to do something. Don't get stuck in a box. I think innovation, creativity, and curiosity are the key to rural development, and that makes it fun every single day. So.
And I would just add that, the importance of organizations like NATO bringing together rural voices from across the country is just critically important. We are also involved in Partners for Rural America as the State's Rural Development Council. We learn we share, we learn, we share. And I just think the more we can communicate with each other, share best practices, discuss challenges, the stronger we'll all be. So I'd just like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to be here today, and for your role every day in bringing communities together.
Well, thank you so much for that. We're so glad you're part of the family here, and you certainly inspire my work as well. So thank you so much for a great conversation today, and looking forward to kind of seeing what lies ahead with all your work here. So last slide here, just please join us for our next webinar. You can register on at nato.org. Again, the recording of today's session will be available tomorrow on our website. You should also get an email if you want to kind of revisit our talk, or also share it with some of your colleagues and folks as well. Finally, there will be a short survey that'll pop up on the screen after we wrap up. So please give us some feedback on our discussion and conversation, and what other issues and topics you'd love to talk about moving forward. So with that, Liza and Kimber, I know you all have busy days ahead, so good luck with that, and we'll catch up soon. But thank you so much again for a really great session today. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hey, take care. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.